Hey there, folks, and welcome to the MindHack podcast, where we uncover the experiences, mindset, and routines of successful people, whatever that field may be. In this episode, we're chatting with Rian Doris, who is the co-founder of the Flow Research Collective, which is an organization dedicated to understanding the neuroscience behind flow states, which are a feeling of total immersion in an activity. Rian has worked intimately with some of the world's leading experts on peak performance, from the founder of positive psychology, Dan Siegel, to Rian's business partner, Stephen Kotler, who happens to be a New York Times best-selling author with books like The Rise of Superman, Bold, and Stealing Fire. In this conversation, we cover a wide range of topics that start with flow, but quickly digress to other areas of psychology, including attachment styles, the importance of finding purpose, and much more. So without further ado, here is Rian Doris. I want to jump right in talking about your experience that you had when you were young, and you almost, I don't know, did you almost die? What happened with the water slide?
Sure, yeah. So when I was 13, I was on a family holiday in Croatia, which is a country toward the east of Europe. And myself and my brother were essentially going to explore a water park, and we ended up going up to the highest slide on the water park, which was about 100-foot vertical slide. And we were going up, climbing up the ladder, and then going down the slide repeatedly with no issues at all. We must have gone up or down 5 or 6 times. And then on my 5th or 6th turn, I attempted to do a somersault off the bottom of the slide. And again, this is a 100-foot high vertical slide. And I semi-rotated and then hit the top of my head off the bottom of the concrete pool, which was only 3 to 4 foot deep, which resulted in an extremely severe impact. And as a result of that, I spent the next year in bed with chronic fatigue, amnesia, unable to remember the name of my favorite band, unable to remember the name of some of my close friends. And then it was about 5 to 6 years after that, so my whole teen years essentially, of recovery required to actually get back to fully fit and healthy and vital. So it was an intense experience.
Would you say that was the most traumatic experience that you had as a kid?
It's a good question. It's the most obviously traumatic experience I've had. Mm-hmm. There may be other experiences that at the time I perceived as more traumatic, like, for example, being left alone as a baby or things like that. So it's the most obvious traumatic experience. That's what I'd say.
So you mentioned being left alone, and earlier in our conversation before we started recording, you mentioned the book Never Eat Alone. Is that related, this other experience?
Not necessarily, no. So Dr. Dan Siegel, his work relates more to this kind of experience. So Dr. Dan Siegel is a professor of psychiatry at UCLA. He's written a ton of New York Times best-selling books, and he founded a whole framework called interpersonal neurobiology, which is a fancy way of saying relational neuroscience. And that whole overarching framework of academic study has led to a number of other researchers going on and studying what actually happens in infants at very early stages of life around interaction with their primary attachment figure, their primary caregiver, and how that can impact brain development, and then obviously as a downstream effect of that, how it can impact personality, behavior, tendencies, etc. So it would relate more to Dr. Dan Siegel and his books rather than Keith's book, but I'm more than happy to dive into Keith's work as well, of course.
Right, that's based on attachment theory, right? And I remember they had a study where they put babies in a room and then they looked at the reactions of the babies when the mother left and came back. And you had I forgot the exact term, but like stable.
Yeah,
attachment?
exactly. There are different attachment styles. So there's disorganized attachment. There is I think it's insecure attachment, but essentially there's a number of different attachment styles, which then tend to correlate into different states of well-being and different degrees of mental health later on in adulthood. And I believe it was Dr. Ed Tronick at Harvard who conducted the study that you're referencing as well.
Yeah, yeah, and how the attachments that we tend to correlate with our parents when we were young, they tend to stay with us through adulthood, and they can affect our relationships and the happiness and satisfaction we derive from those relationships, especially if you're an insecure attachment. I would say I'm certainly insecure, and to be able to recognize what are those symptoms and then to try and actively change that. Do you know what your attachment style is?
It's a good question, man. I think it's fearful avoidant. Although, again, they change. I mean, the attachment styles tend to change a little bit alongside the research, but there's secure attachment, there's anxious attachment, there's avoidant dismissive, and then avoidant fearful. So I definitely know what the results of whatever my attachment style have been, but I think it would be avoidant dismissive, or something similar to that.
Hmm. And I'll link a book. I know that there's a lot of great research on the attachment styles, as well as even a link to a quiz so you can take it yourself. But it's very useful information. But on that, Rian, you said that your parents were also very supportive, that you were lucky to have that. So do you think that contributed to your current success, being the co-founder of this other successful company?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who says that they are fully self-made, although I think you may be one of the very few exceptions to that based on what you told me about your own journey. It sounds pretty incredible, but for the most part, anyone who claims self-made status is underestimating the impact that external figures or factors tend to have on an individual. And that may be societal factors, and someone being born into a first world country that has free access to Wi-Fi and internet and things like that. And that also may be being born into a family, with loving parents who prioritize education, are supportive, and foster growth within their child.
Hmm.
So yeah, massive impact. And I think discounting the impact of that would be arrogant of me and inaccurate.
Right, and we always have to acknowledge the impact of others. And I know that there's a quote on work, and that all existing work, all of ideas, are built on top of other people's ideas from the past. And so we always build upon each other, and it's never right to fully claim something as your own, because it's all shared knowledge in some respect. And
Exactly.
and so you're the co-founder of the Flow Genome Institute, which is a company, I believe, that focuses specifically on teaching people how to enter a state of flow, which I find fascinating. And you ended up co-founding this with Stephen Kotler, who is a pretty famous author nowadays, at least in the world of nonfiction, as he in some ways helped to pioneer and popularize this concept of flow, which, as I understand, was the concept was created by Csikszentmihalyi, if I'm saying his name properly. And can you tell me about how you founded this Flow Genome Institute, how you were able to enter this and become the entrepreneur that you are today? Because a lot of people look at that, they look at your success and they're, that they want to be that, right? So just tell me about how you got to where you are.
Totally. Yeah. And by the way, it's Flow Research Collective, just for folks who are listening. I know it's a little bit of a clunky name, so no worries. But yeah, it's Flow Research Collective. And so we were talking again a little bit offline about the idea of, hustle at an early age and reach outs and connecting with mentors. And the first step, I think, in getting to this point, and again, I don't want to, overemphasize the point I'm currently at, or exaggerate the current level of success that I have. But let's just say that the process of getting to whatever this point that I'm currently in is began with getting extremely clear about what I wanted to actually do from a professional standpoint and from an impact and mastery standpoint. So, where I wanted to develop deep knowledge and skills, how I wanted to impact the world, and obviously as an overarching umbrella of that, how, what I wanted my kind of professional endeavors to look like over my life, essentially. So that was the first step, was getting crystal clear on that. And what I did was a ton of internships, essentially. That was the process, was reaching out within Dublin in Ireland, where I'm based, and working for free for as many people as I possibly could. And if I couldn't work for free full time, because of obviously having to make money through other endeavors, I would work for free part time in the evenings. And I went around knocking on the doors of law firms in Dublin, thinking that my calling or the mission or what I wanted to do was to be a barrister at one point, and worked in a law firm and was able to write that off the list pretty damn fast as something I didn't want to do. But I continued that process, essentially, of working for free for different people within different environments and different sectors, and gradually was able to clear or write certain things off the list as definite don't want to do's, which then, as a byproduct of that, resulted in a narrowing of focus. Even though I wasn't necessarily getting clear on what I did want to do, I was definitely getting significantly clear on what I did not want to do. And so that just by default resulted in a narrowing of focus. And over about 2 years of doing well over a dozen different kinds of internships and casual, work agreements and gigs, I was able to spot some underlying patterns within what I was actually passionate about, what I was enjoying, what I was good at. And I arrived on the conclusion of what I then called leadership development, which was this idea of using a certain knowledge base, so knowledge around peak performance, in our case, the Flow Research Collective, potentially knowledge around, team performance, collaboration, and communication, like Keith Ferrazzi uses, or just some form of knowledge around something with respect to human capability, and then teaching and training individuals within the workplace with that knowledge to improve their performance in the workplace by helping them perform better, get in the flow more consistently, communicate better. So that was the conclusion of the overarching field that I landed on, that I wanted to get into, was leadership development. And then from there, I researched the best way to do that and what it actually looked like. And that involved, hustling tons and tons and tons and tons of people who were consultants within this space, who had businesses within this space, who were thought leaders within this sort of overarching space, and getting on calls with them, trying to figure out what the hell it actually looks like, what the different possibilities within leadership development are, whether to go into it as a consultant and speaker and author, whether to go into it as an entrepreneur, what way to attack it. And then from there, that resulted in me reaching out to some of the folks we've already mentioned. So Dr. Dan Siegel, Keith Ferrazzi, and obviously Stephen as well. And then getting connected with them and being able to work with them, which has been amazing.
How old were you when you determined this path towards leadership development?
I think it was about 18.
That's a pretty incredible young age. I think a lot of people would have to say, like, how did you develop this level of self-confidence within yourself to try out these different strategies? Because so many people that I've talked to lack that self-confidence to even reach out to those successful people, because they feel this anxiety, this fear, even in their presence. And they feel like, oh, I can't touch them. They're all the way up on this level. How did you achieve that were you just naturally self-confident, or did you develop this some other way?
Yeah, it's a good question, man. So, well, the first thing I would just say as a side note to anyone who does feel a sense of anxiety or reluctance or a lack of self-confidence about reaching out to someone, or feels insecurity in the presence of someone who they deem greater to themselves, if that person that you feel insecure around is actually judging you, is actually going to be negative towards you or unjustly critical of you, it invalidates any greatness that you think they have, or at least that's the way I like to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So from that perspective, I don't think that, I think that ideally just remembering that everyone's just human, and that if they are thinking of you negatively, then that's a negative thing, which then makes them less great than you think they're great, which then decreases the degree to which you should be insecure around it in the first place.
And
That's a
everybody
side
has
tangent.
and everybody has so many problems that maybe they spend a few seconds thinking about you, even if you have a negative interaction. But the majority of the time, people are just thinking about their own problems.
Totally. And if someone's thinking in depth about, how some young person aggressively emailed them, then they're probably not someone who you should aspire to be like or follow up with anyway.
And
So it's sort of win-win in that respect.
Was this a thought that you had when you were 18 that allowed you to start reaching out to these people, or was there something else around this self-confidence factor that you had?
Yeah, no, this is more of a recent realization. When I was 18, I think the first thing that led to self-confidence was clarity. So getting extremely clear about what the hell I wanted to do. And then what led to the clarity was a level of just obsession, determination, persistence, and restlessness. I felt very uncomfortable existentially not knowing what I wanted to do. It was like a really unpleasant, almost unbearable, sounds very extreme, but there was actually almost an unbearable nature to it. To not knowing what the hell I wanted to do. I felt like I had all this energy, I had all this drive and desire, and not having a clear lane to channel it down felt very unpleasant. So that drove me to get clear, and then the clarity by default increases confidence significantly. And then from there was the bravado, or whatever you want to call it, to reach out to people who were definitely way above my pay grade.
And so it seems that you've always been able to go outside your comfort zone, even with the internship, because certainly those things and the jobs that you had were not very comfortable, and you're doing things in areas that you had no prior expertise. And then you went from doing those internships, and then you found that you had some level of ambition that you wanted to do, and you found this, not meaning, but you found a purpose presently at 18 that was centered around wanting to teach and do growth in some respect of that nature. And so then your strategy, the one that you formulated, was to start reaching out to successful people. Can you tell me more about the strategy that you had?
Totally. And that's a nice summary as well. So what I would do, thankfully I got into, again, this is somewhat luck, because I did study like a maniac, but I got into my first choice university in Ireland, which was Trinity College Dublin. And my rationale, well, actually, I'd been reaching out to people a lot before that, trying to determine the degree to which a college course, or what you would call in America a major, actually mattered. So I would reach out to people while I was in my final year of high school and get on the phone with them, and then ask them, would you be willing to hire someone for this position if they have this degree? And realized, thankfully, through that process, that they didn't actually care that much whether someone has a degree or what the degree is in. So that liberated me from being attached to getting into a specific major, which is the way it works in Ireland. And then I was able to just choose the university. So I was liberated from the specific major, and then able to choose the university. And Trinity College Dublin has the best international reputation of any university in Ireland. So I then was able to go based on reputation rather than based on specific major, which all of a sudden opened up way more options for me that required required lower grades. Thankfully, I got the highest points anyway, but my highest choice anyway. But I basically was able to settle on Trinity as a university beforehand. And anyway, the reason I mentioned that is that my outreach strategy involved leveraging the fact that I was a Trinity College Dublin student.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would
As an
do
authority.
essentially, yeah, exactly. Because a lot of folks, especially in the US, who I was reaching out to would instantly know Trinity College Dublin. And again, this is in no way to say that if you don't have this sort of brand name university to leverage, that you can't do this. There are other ways, and in retrospect, much more effective ways to reach out to people that I would now use. But what I used to do was I would start with, I still actually have all the emails in my Gmail, funnily enough, but it would be something along the lines of, hi, whatever their name was. I'm a X age, so 18-year-old student at Trinity College Dublin. I love your work for X reason. I want to help with X thing, and I believe I can. And then something along the lines of, what can we do to make this happen? Or how can I help you? So there was always that element of just like palm up, offering value no matter what. And then I would just compile lists and spreadsheets of people I wanted to get in touch with, and literally just cold email them and then follow up like crazy. I mean, like sometimes 30, 40, 50 emails to the same person until I got a reply. And I would get replies from Harvard professors, some of the industry leaders in all sorts of different fields. And obviously a certain amount of those bites end up materializing into bigger things, like what happened with Stephen, Dan Siegel, and Keith as well.
And during this time, you started doing a lot of speaking engagements at some point. How did you start going from no speaking, no authority to starting this path towards, say, becoming an influencer and talking about this particular topic?
Well, speaking engagements have just come much more recently. That I did some speaking engagements within high school and things like that, which were
Okay.
more unrelated to professional endeavors. And there's a point on that I think is very important, and this is something that's shifted for me in the last 3 to 4 years. My original goal, was to become an authority, to become an influencer, to become a expert, or to be seen as an expert was probably more the actual motivation than to be an expert. And I very much so have changed my opinion on that. I think that there are just endless quote unquote influencers, people who have in their LinkedIn bio, speaker, author, investor, biohacker, this, that, the other. And so I personally, it's just nothing but a personal preference thing and a values thing. And there's nothing wrong with that avenue. But I think it's good to focus on substance first,
Right.
and then go the influencer, speaker, author, etc. route once you've either done something significant or amassed significant expertise and knowledge on a subject that matters.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So you're saying establish authority, credibility, establish expert advice in a field first, and then you have the self confidence. But then you can label yourself as an influencer.
Well,
But also, I think a
well,
lot of people become influencers, and then by the very fact that they're selling themselves, they're getting this credibility, they're getting interviews, and then they learn as they go. What are your thoughts on that?
well, I would just say that authority, credibility, influence, all of those things are byproducts. They're not things to actually aim for. You should aim for something that actually matters and has substance. And then if you hit that goal, those things will be a necessary or inevitable byproduct by default.
Right.
So I think rather than aiming for that, it's kind of missing the mark, I think, in terms of prioritization. Those things are just side effects. They're not
Right.
the actual thing.
Yeah, it's like fake happiness, like buying, like materialism. Like you get a short burst of dopamine, but it doesn't help in the long run because you still have to endure a lot of shit that you don't really want to do, and that's just a part of that journey of success and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think so. And again, obviously no judgment for people who just want to go that route, but I think it is very important from a selfish standpoint and a competitiveness standpoint for those individuals who are contemplating what path to go. I think a lot of the folks who do not have substance, and again, substance can come in the form of significant accomplishment. It can come in the form of significant expertise or knowledge or experience. But a lot of folks who do not have what we're calling substance here yet are attempting to go that influencer, authority, personal brand route will just get washed out pretty fast, and potentially are getting washed out right now within, this whole COVID-19
Yeah,
situation.
and the ones who it's not necessarily just the people who decide to work on the weekends. It's the fact that if you do work on the weekend, you're motivated because you have some purpose behind your work that is driving that desire to go towards this goal. And I think anything like I want to be famous or I want to have a bunch of Instagram followers, that is sort of like just one of those fake achievements that you achieve along the more genuine, authentic path towards becoming somebody. And I've thought a lot about like my own purpose, and I've struggled a lot to try and define this for myself. But I came up that you can the most generous thing that you can do is you can either you basically help others to some extent, and that is for me been what I've been able to think of in terms of like finding a purpose and meaning and passion and desire to work and do hard things. What would you say
So,
your meaning, your purpose behind your success?
totally, man. Yeah. So the first point I would just make there is that if you look at the research and the literature within positive psychology, that is the common denominator amidst meaningful or purposeful lives is having some kind of contribution or impact to something that is greater than yourself. And that's the determination, is greater than yourself. And again, you can do that through just going straight to being an influencer. Potentially there's someone who's had really tough mental health issues, for example, and them just doing nothing more than sharing the challenges they've had and the simple ways that they've overcome those challenges on Instagram can have a massive positive impact on a hell of a lot of people. So I don't want to overly talk down that route, but it is just important to just figure out like what the actual thing is and then why it matters to you and others. And go ahead, say.
Everybody had to endure some level of trauma or problem. And honestly, I don't believe that you've achieved your full potential until you hit that lowest of the low, until you've been where you're almost out of money and you're going to lose where you're living, and you put your last dollar into the business like Elon Musk, where you put yourself, or unintentionally even, you're in these desperate situations and you found a way to get out. And honestly, that's the story behind a lot of successful people, behind what's driving their success. And it's rare. And I've met those people. I've met those entrepreneurs who literally have had no traumatic events that they can recall that has driven their success. Those people are out there. But I think the vast majority of people have something that's driving them towards this path. And it just kind of lights a fire under your ass because you're in this desperate situation. And it's like, how do you get out? And a lot of influencers and even people who are self-made entrepreneurs have that to some extent.
Yeah, totally. And I think if you have that, whatever that is, meaning that kind of inner sense of, again, I described it as restfulness, or this sense of it almost being unbearable to not have something to channel my energy into. But upon, deeper examination of my own psychology, I've realized that it also was the result probably of some kind of fundamental trauma or insecurity around, feeling insignificant unless doing X or Y thing. So if you have that underlying sense of whatever from a psychological standpoint, and rather than it resulting in negative behaviors or habits or things that propel you downward, if you can harness that and channel it towards building and growth and progress, I think that's phenomenal. But also I would add as a caveat that you do not have to experience trauma to have ferocious drive or ambition or persistence. And if you can muster, which I believe everyone can, immense drive and ambition without having to go through adversity, that's great and that's fine. And you shouldn't try and self-traumatize or add unnecessary struggle just for the sake of becoming wiser at the other end of it, or believing, I think falsely, that you will become wiser at the other end of some form of suffering. And I think that's a myth within the whole hustle culture at the moment, that suffering, grind, struggle, pain, blood, sweat, and tears are necessities for success. And again, they may be things that are inevitable, but they're definitely not necessary. In other words, you may, to produce the result you're trying to produce, potentially requires those things, but maybe it doesn't. And if it doesn't, phenomenal. You don't want to add in unnecessary struggle. You just want to get done whatever you're trying to get done as efficiently as possible.
I take it, I'm forgetting his name, the founder of wine.com, who has the marketing agency.
Gary Vaynerchuk?
Yeah, Gary. I assume you're not a fan of Gary Vaynerchuk.
I'm actually a massive fan of him in many ways. I find him very, very inspiring. I think he gets a very hard time for what he puts out. And I think that message is also critical to a lot of people who aren't taking action, who are static and are stagnant. And they watch this video, this guy screaming at them about hustle and grind and working all night, doing whatever it takes. And that's phenomenal, to get moving, to develop a growth mindset and believe you actually can create things and you're not hitched to a traditional path, and that work ethic results in results. But there's a certain point at which that advice runs out. Once you are moving, once you are working, once you are getting after it, it doesn't work to just keep adding hustle. Ultimately, it just comes down to output. And that's one of the things we talk about at the Flow Research Collective. Productivity is nothing more than how much output you can produce for a given unit of input. And that contradicts with the do more to get more advice from the likes of Grant Cardone or Gary Vaynerchuk. If you're doing more to get more, or in many cases doing more to get the same, you are becoming less productive, even if you're working more hours. The goal is to maximize output for minimal input, and to constantly improve the ratio of input to output so that you're able to produce more, get more results for continually less and less input of effort, of time, of energy, etc.
Yeah, so much with that, and that's where delegation comes into play. My first business, I was actually doing everything from the design, the marketing, the operations, the support. And it was only once I sold that company that I read Tim Ferriss's book, The 4 Hour Work Week, and then figured out, wait, I can outsource all these things. And that's actually what led to the founding of my current company, is to incorporate that strategy of delegation so I can focus on the items that do give me the most flow. Because at the end of the day, what I think Gary Vaynerchuk preaches is this idea of always be hustling, always be working. You have no time to be lazy or do anything else.
Right.
And for me, that idea led to burnout. And it was actually years, because I started at 15, 18 or 17, when I started to have this repeated burnout, which it would come and go for weeks on end. And I would just be playing video games. And it sucked, because I wanted to be productive. I wanted to have an output, but I just felt like I couldn't muster the energy to do anything within me. And it would last for weeks on end. And that's the burnout. It was the opposite of flow. It's the opposite of what you want to achieve.
Totally, man. Totally. I think that's super, super important. And ultimately you just got to figure out what's the thing you actually want as output. What's the thing you're optimizing for? Is it a business? Is it a 7-figure business? Like what actually is it? And then how do you produce that output? And what matters is the output, or the outcome, or the result, or whatever you want to call it, occurs. It does not matter that you are the one to make it occur, and especially not that you working infinite hours is the thing that makes it occur. And I think that's where a lot of people at an earlier, more entry level stage of entrepreneurship or whatever it is get caught. I think that that the output is somehow better if they've sweated for it and grinded for it and stayed up late for it. But I think that's total nonsense, and actually results to much worse performance over the long haul, and, as you're saying, burnout.
Yeah, just off the top of your head, are there any ideologies or methods that you follow that you've read from other people, like strategies, whether it's like OKRs, whether it's the EOS system for entrepreneurship, or say that the Getting Things Done by David Allen? Anything that you've read that incorporates, whether it's goal setting or how you prioritize your day, anything that you've read that you incorporate?
Sure, Matt. So all of those systems, in certain respects, I'm a fan of. I think David Allen's Getting Things Done system has some good points. Where what it misses is an accountance for neurobiology and physiology. So he focuses on tactics and strategies, but he does not take into account, at least from what I've read and seen, the degree to which your physiology impacts your performance and output. So, for example, one of his big things is, the whole idea of an in-trail, getting everything out of your head, writing it all down. And I think that's a phenomenal strategy. And the reason it's a phenomenal strategy is because of the phenomenon called cognitive load, which is essentially the idea that you can only hold a fixed amount of information in working memory at any given time.
Mm-hmm.
And after a certain threshold, that cognitive load is going to reduce your cognitive capacity and thus reduce the degree to which you can focus on other things. So if you've got 15 to-do list items in your head, you're not going to be focused. You're not going to be able to focus very effectively on whatever task it is that you're doing. So with strategies like that, because there is an underlying neurophysiological mechanism at play, those kinds of pieces of advice from the likes of David Allen, I think, are phenomenal. There are other things that I disagree with, like the 2-minute rule. I think it's called the 2-minute rule, the idea that you should just do something if it's going to take you less than 2 minutes. Because again, there's other neurophysiological factors that have to be accounted for with that. For example, the cost of task switching and the idea of attention residue. So, switching task and just doing something, even if it's quick and even if it's productive, is going to decrease your performance when you switch back to doing whatever other task it is. And I think personally, this is just an opinion-based judgment, that some of the more conventional productivity systems don't fully account for the degree to which your physiology comes into play, and they underestimate that in the advice they give. That said, obviously lots of amazing wisdom from David Allen. He's pioneered lots of this whole field, so I'm a fan of his stuff. The OKRs as well, John Doerr's book around that is interesting and helpful on a more organizational front, or obviously you can apply OKRs personally. What was the other one you mentioned?
Well, I just use those as examples. I was wondering if you had any methodologies, but I was curious actually. Have you heard of Rome Research?
Rome Research.
Yeah, it's a new tool that's been out for a few months, and it's effectively a note-taking tool that tries to replicate the way that we think. So unlike Notion, where you have various pages to store various information, is that it allows you to create links and recall information from other topics. So if you were, say, if we have a conversation here, I have my notes inside of Rome and we talk about flow, and then I end up writing an article about flow. I can look inside of Rome and I can see every mention of flow and the various topics and kind of correlate the. It's hard to explain. It's really hard. I'm not doing it justice at all.
Man. No, I hear exactly what you're saying. Yeah, it's a tool that's actually built to factor the way our brains work
exactly
into the fundamental design.
And then, have you also heard of Tiago Forte's course, Building a Second Brain?
No, that also sounds epic.
Yeah, I'd recommend looking into that. He created the system, his own methodology called Para, which is about how to organize and store information online. And then he created the course Building a Second Brain that shows this method in detail, as well as the various software and systems in terms of how he's organized his information. So he's able to recall that more effectively, because I've noticed I have Evernote, but rarely do I ever actually look inside of Evernote. Whenever I'm trying to research a topic, my default is always just to go to Google, and yet it's hard to establish this habit of going inside of a specific system and finding existing notes related to that topic. And he does a very good job at allowing you to create a habit in a system where you're able to more directly recall this information from the past. And one of the actually great habits that I've had is I still use a Kindle to actually read books, and I use a highlight system. And one of the things I would do is I would have my highlights synced into Evernote. And so every weekend, whenever I was doing my weekend tasks, which is basically any tasks I just need to do once a week, and I would actually look through this entire notebook inside of Evernote of all my book highlights. And I would ask myself, what are the current problems or issues I'm going through right now? And I would try and find a book that's relevant to that. And I would be able to reread my highlights. And then he also adds a system on top of that, which is a form of recalling information. So whenever you're going through that notebook, say you will highlight certain areas within those notes that are specific to you or your interest, and then you add another layer on top of that where you go and actually bold some of those points as well. So this very act is allowing you to recall more and more information. And we're way off topic. Any add-ons, any thoughts?
Amazing. No, I love that. I'm definitely going to do that building a second brain course. A friend of mine, super smart guy, has what he calls a knowledge base. So his own personal knowledge base. So essentially, every time he learns anything, he takes it down in Notion, actually, although I should refer him to this tool you're mentioning. He takes it down and has literally everything he knows and everything he is learning in real time built out in Notion. So every insight, every piece of knowledge he wants to recall is all there as a second brain, as you're describing, which improves retention, recall, etc.
Yeah, I've had an issue, and we're off topic, but I don't care at the moment. I'm inside of Notion. So Notion's this really cool kind of wiki software in case you're not familiar with it. But the problem I've had with it is that it's a software that effectively you can use it for everything, for task management, for projects, for calendar, for writing. And it makes it hard to actually associate all of these items with that. And I found it's actually easier to associate a specific task with a specific problem or a specific app, because our brains are association machines. We are subconsciously influenced every time we enter a room. And I've gone to the detail where my home office, I have lights that change color throughout the day to indicate to my own subconscious kind of what mode I should be thinking about. Because if we're trying to work in bed, then, we might be thinking about other things, or we're going to defer to the activity that gives us the most instant dopamine. And I found that to be interesting, the subconscious, how it influences us. And any thoughts on that?
Interesting, man. Yeah, totally. No, I mean, I think the idea of triggers is very helpful. So just having different environmental or behavioral triggers that then trigger a habit or a second behavior. So for example, Josh Waitzkin, who's an amazing learning expert, wrote a book called The Art of Learning. Mm-hmm. And he talks about the idea of having a song that just preps him for game day or showtime, which is obviously a common idea. But deploying those kinds of triggers where, X equals Y can be very, very helpful. So I have friends as well, they'll wake up in the morning and the first thing they do is clap. And that is just a super simple trigger for the day being started and then being ready to go. Obviously, the idea of a morning routine is a form of longer trigger that primes you for your day. But I think, embedding those kinds of triggers throughout the day can be super helpful.
What's your morning routine?
So I tend to actually go straight into work for 3 hours as soon as I wake up. So my goal is to be working within about a minute of waking up. Wow. And then I'll do my highest priority tasks for 3 hours. And often in that period, get done, a really good day's work in just in that 3 hours. And the reason for that is that your brainwave signature is closer to flow upon waking. And so you can get into flow more easily by working very, very quickly before you've even fully woken yourself up. So I tend to do that. I find that extremely, extremely productive. And then I'll do my, elaborate classic self-development style morning routine. And what that looks like is a workout at the moment, a home workout with pull-up bar, dipping bar, free weights, etc. Then foam rolling, then stretching, yoga style stretching. Then I will do a little bit of gratitude journaling. I tend to read all of my long-term goals. I like to do that every morning. And then I do 20 minutes of breath work. And then I usually jump in a cold pool or have a nice cold shower. And then kick off the next half of the day.
Have you tried the Wim Hoffman technique?
Totally. Yeah, I love his app. His app's phenomenal. I think it's just called Wim Hof method, and the bubble breathing specifically is killer.
And so I want to zoom out because we just went down a major rabbit hole. How did you end up getting introduced to Steven Kotler and starting this venture?
So with Steven, he was one of the people that I was a fan of and wanted to reach out to. I didn't actually end up reaching out to him, funnily enough, but what I did do was I listened to him on a podcast with Dave Asprey, the founder of Bulletproof. And then I just had a tendency, and again, this is just a simple habit that was part of this overall kind of outreach mentality, to add everyone that I was a fan of, whether it was a podcast guest or an entrepreneur I liked what they were doing or whatever it was. I would just add them on Facebook always. And so I added Steven on Facebook on his personal page. He had 4,000, nearly 5,000 friend requests or whatever, so it was close to the limit, but must have connected my request. And then literally about a year after that, or maybe even more, he posted on Facebook asking for interns. And I shot him a private Facebook message. Then he gave me this sort of intern trial task, which was his version of an interview that involved fairly mundane work, compiling spreadsheets and reworking data and organizing some of his articles. I did that. Then he gave me more trial tasks. I did that. Then he gave me more trial tasks. I did that. And then slowly expanded my portfolio of work with him and have been sort of by his side now since, for almost 4 or 5 years, and just increasing the workload up to obviously running, company with him.
Now you're the CEO.
So, yeah. Over time. Yeah.
And what does, and I think it's the Flow Research Collective, right? What do you guys do specifically?
Sure. So there's 2 elements to the company. We have a research side and a training side. On the training side, we help entrepreneurs, usually entrepreneurs who are a little more late stage and have children, usually over 40, to improve their performance, get more done in less time with greater ease by teaching them how to get into flow consistently within their work. And on the research side, we are partnered with different universities like UCLA, USC, Deloitte, and Stanford, a number of big universities doing research into the neuroscience of flow. It's having to understand what is going on in the brain and the body when in a flow state. And then training wise, so we've got 4 main trainings. There's one that's a little more entry level, or our first training called 0 to Dangerous. And within all of our trainings, you work one-on-one with a coach. And all of our coaches are PhD level experts in peak performance and flow. And so you work one-on-one with a peak performance coach who is a PhD. There's tons of content, that breaks down all the maps and models and research around peak performance and flow, along with exactly how to apply it and exercises to apply it in your own life. And then there's weekly group coaching. And I mentioned that mainly because that's a really important distinguisher or decision we've made, which is to try and build the world's most highly credentialed elite group of peak performance coaches, rather than going the route of online information products, internet marketing, etc. We really want to become the McKinsey of peak performance coaching.
And so everybody enters flow to some extent, whether they're aware of it or not, whether they're playing a video game or whether you're in a basketball game. And so I imagine that your service focuses on, say, top athletes and executives, right? And so if I'm an executive or I'm a small business owner and I'm trying to build my business, is it essential for me to find a flow within that business that I'm building? Or can I sustain my overall happiness, my wellness by still finding flow in other areas that come more natural to me? And I don't know whether you can find flow by watching Netflix or not, but I know that there's other things outside of, say, just work itself that you can find flow. And does that replace any level of stress that you would get within the business if you can't find flow? Because when I imagine flow in a business, it's this level between boredom and stress where you're able to find this right Goldilocks ratio where you're not too bored but you're not too stressed because you have some familiarity with that knowledge, and you're able to get a how would I describe it? Like a happiness out of it, and it's not stressful by itself. You're actually becoming happier and you're enjoying the work that you're doing versus, say, if you're having a business and you're having to work and do a lot of things. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
So, yeah, man. So it's important to mention, you can be productive, not in flow. So you can be very productive outside of a flow state, and obviously as a result of that, build a business and do whatever other thing it is you're trying to do. But you're not going to be optimally productive, first of all. And then for a lot of people, more importantly, it's not going to feel good at all. So the beautiful thing about a flow state is that it's the one state that has this intersection between optimal performance and it feeling phenomenal. It's both maximum productivity and maximum enjoyment, satisfaction, and on the back end of a flow state, well-being as well. So for sure, you can sustain productivity and you can do certain things, but you're not going to be doing them optimally. They're not going to feel as good. It's going to feel like a lot of grind, a lot of effort, and obviously, you're not going to be, maximizing your capacity. And then over the longer term, you are also likely going to be more susceptible to burnout, fatigue. And I say that because one of the foundational pieces of research on flow done by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, you mentioned earlier, found that flow is very, very, very highly correlated with a sense of meaning and satisfaction in life in general. That means that if you regularly get into a flow state, you are more likely to feel like your life is meaningful overall, even outside the flow state itself. And that obviously makes a very big difference for entrepreneurs when they have to endure all sorts of difficult, turbulent times and deal with a lot of complexity and chaos.
And so where can people go to learn more about flow? What books can they read? And where can they go to learn more from you about what you're doing with the Flow Research Collective?
Sure. So the first thing I would mention is just flowresearchcollective.com, which is our website. We got free content on there. There's our email list. We put out a newsletter every Monday that has lots of amazing free resources in it on flow and peak performance in general. So that'll be the first place. Then as far as books, what I would recommend is Rise of Superman by Stephen Kotler. Then Steel and Fire, although it doesn't focus on flow specifically, it focuses on non-ordinary states more broadly, by Stephen and Jamie, who was the co-founder of the Flow Genome Project. And then Flow, the book just called Flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi would be another good one as well. I would also recommend checking out Dr. Andrew Huberman on Instagram. His Instagram is Huberman Lab. He's on our advisory board. He's a professor of neuroscience at Stanford. He's an incredible mind on all things the neuroscience of peak performance.
Okay, great. And I have a lot more questions, but I know that we're short on time. So thank you, Rian. And we'll have all of the people, the books, anything is in the show notes. So be sure to check that out. Thank you, Rian.
Thanks, Cody, and thanks for doing this, man. And again, everything that you've accomplished is just absolutely incredible. So we'll have to do a turntable at some point, and I'd love to interview you on all that you've been doing and have done.
Yeah, love that too. Thank you. Hey guys, this is Cody again. I hope you enjoyed that episode of MindHack, and if you're interested in getting more MindHack-worthy stuff straight to your inbox, then you might consider signing up for my weekly newsletter. It often contains links to new episodes, blog posts, and other interesting finds I found on the interweb in the past week. It pretty much focuses around productivity and efficiency, so if that's your thing, then be sure to visit my website at codymclain.com, that's MCLAIN.com, to sign up. Also, if there are any interesting websites, companies, books, blog posts, quotes, or anything else that was mentioned in this episode, you can find it all and more by visiting the official website for the MindHack Show at mindhack.com. And as always, if you have any feedback, good or bad, I want to hear it. Send me a tweet, email, or what have you on either of my websites, as my goal with this show is to give you the maximum value in the shortest amount of time. That's all for now, guys. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you guys again soon.